I figured for today, I would just read the text of the chapter and give my thoughts on it as we go through. And maybe that would be pretty effective. So this is chapter 24. I think there's only like 27 chapters. Either way, we're almost at the end. And this is called, the name of the chapter heading here is Jesus Speaks About the Future. It seems like it's mostly about Jesus talking about, I guess, this idea of like the second coming of Christ, or like when the end of the world is going to happen. We'll get into it. So let's begin. Verse 1. As Jesus was leaving the temple grounds, his disciples pointed out to him the various temple buildings. But he responded, "Do you see all these buildings? I tell you the truth, they will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of another." I mean, I feel like right here, he's already giving like a sort of rejection or admonition to like, I guess like materialism is kind of what I'm thinking. Like I'm getting an energy of like, the energy is sort of like, well, none of these buildings or these things or these objects are as important as loving God and loving your neighbor. Building a fancy monument, building a pretty building, it means nothing because it's like vanity. I mean, it's not always like by nature vanity, but I think in most cases it's done as vanity. Okay, continuing verse 3. Or actually, before we even continue, it's kind of an interesting verse too, because like, if you've ever seen photographs of, like famous politicians, when they go to visit Israel, especially like I've seen a lot of photographs of like U.S. presidents, when they go to visit Israel, it's like really common for them to take a photo op where they're wearing like a yarmulke and they go to visit what's called, I think it's called like the Wailing Wall or something like that. And I think the whole like significance there is that actually is a still standing portion of like the old, what would it be, like this, the third temple, the third Jewish temple, like the very same temple that Jesus is he's saying right now, he's saying right in this verse here, not one stone will be left on top of another. I mean, but there are still stones like on top of one another even to this day. You can still go there and like you can see it and touch it. And I think what people do is they write like little prayers, and then they like put these like pieces of paper like in the cracks of the stones, like between the stones. I don't know. It's kind of curious to think like, what happens with those prayers? Like if a president writes some kind of like intimate prayer request and he like leaves it in the bricks of this, the ruins of this one wall, like from this old ruined temple. Does someone like go and get that later and then they read it and they're like, ah, yes, this is what the president was praying for. Interesting. Or like, you know what I mean? Like, because eventually those cracks have to like fill up with paper, right? So what do? Someone has to go get all that paper and like, what do they do with it? I don't know. It's just something to think about though. So I guess it kind of goes, it sort of begs the question of like, well, how literally do you want to interpret this? Or more like even like, well, what's the time frame here? Because Jesus says that not one stone will be left on top of one another. Okay, well, there still are some stones left on top of one another. So does it mean I doubt that he's just like wrong. I feel like it just like hasn't been fulfilled yet and we're like still on the way. And it seems like this whole chapter is about like the end of the world. So I mean, I guess we're getting there. It's not over yet, right? I mean, we're all still here, so I guess we still have time. Okay, moving on, verse 3. Later, Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives. His disciples came to him privately and said, "Tell us, when will all this happen? What sign will signal your return and the end of the world?" What is this, 24 verse 3? Or the age. What sign will signal your return and the end of the age? The end of the world, the end of the age. Sorry, I feel like I have to sneeze. I'm kind of like holding it in, or it hasn't fully like arrived yet. Jesus told them, "Don't let anyone mislead you, for many will come in my name claiming, 'I am the Messiah.' They will deceive many, and you will hear of wars and threats of wars. But don't panic. Yes, these things must take place, but the end won't follow immediately. Nation will go to war against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in many parts of the world. But all this is only the first of the birth pains, with more to come." So it's pretty interesting that his disciples are asking him about the end of the world, but Jesus responds by referring to birth pains. So I feel like you can definitely read into that a little bit, right? It's not just like death. It's not like you would think of the end of the world as like death, right? But Jesus is actually referring to it as the first of birth pains, like actually the beginning. And I think that all the things that he listed here about like nations going to war against nations and famines and earthquakes, he says all these things are the first of the birth pains. And I think you could definitely observe that these things are going on right now today. I know recently, maybe like in the last year or two, there was a big earthquake in Turkey that I remember hearing about. As far as like nations going to war against nations, the thing that I think of is like Russia versus Ukraine. And then as far as famines go, honestly, I feel like I don't really know of any famines. But you hear about them, every now and then. All right, let's continue. Well, maybe I should... No, let's just continue. Verse 9. Then you will be arrested, persecuted, and killed. You will be hated all over the world because you are my followers. What is this? 24 verse 9? Or you will be hated all over the world because... No, you will be hated all over the world on account of my name. Or you will be hated all over the world because you are my followers. And many will turn away from me and betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and will deceive many people. Sin will be rampant everywhere, and the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And the good news about the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world, so that all nations will hear it, and then the end will come. Okay. So, I feel like you can sort of read it as like still, everything that he's listing is still preceding the end. And I think later he uses language like when you see vultures circling above, you know that there's like a corpse nearby. Or when you see a tree beginning to blossom with new leaves, you know that very soon it will bear fruit. So I guess like in the same vein, he's saying that like if you can read these signs, and when all of these signs are like accomplished, then the end will come. So to be honest, it kind of feels like we still have time, but we're definitely getting there. And for me in particular, it's verse 14, where Jesus says, the good news about the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world, so that all nations will hear it, and then the end will come. So I just kind of have a feeling like maybe we're not there yet. I'm definitely remembering like it was like a news headline the last couple of years. There was like some kind of uncontacted tribe of people living on an island in like the Indian Ocean, and there was a Christian missionary who went there because it was his intention to like tell them about the kingdom. I think he got killed though. He got shot with a bow and arrow and he died. That's what I heard. So I feel like as long as there are still kingdoms and there are still nations in the world who haven't yet heard the good news about the kingdom, probably we're still kind of like waiting for the end. But I feel like we got to be getting like a lot closer. Now I think now that the internet is becoming a huge thing, I wonder what role that has. Because like if everybody can get onto the internet and you can read about, or you can hear about, learn about, watch videos about the gospel just from the internet, does that count? Anyways, maybe we should go back because I feel like, oh, And thanks for following. I saw that I got a new follower. Thanks for following. Maybe just like something in verse 9. Jesus, that was where Jesus said, "You will be hated all over the world because you are my followers." I'm not really sure what to say other than like, yeah, all right, don't forget about that part. You'll be arrested, persecuted, even killed. Some of those things have happened to me before. And depending on how you even want to interpret it, maybe all of them. I mean, you could say, like, my old self was killed so that my new self, like, born again by the Holy Spirit, could be born. Arrested, persecuted, and killed. But that's sort of a more mystical interpretation of Christianity. Let's keep going. Verse 15. Jesus says, "The day is coming when you will see what Daniel the prophet spoke about, the sacrilegious object that causes desecration standing in the holy place." Reader, pay attention. So what does Jesus mean when he talks about this so-called sacrilegious object that causes desecration? Or actually, I'm not even sure I really prefer that translation. It also comes up here as the abomination of desolation. And I kind of prefer that one, to be honest. So, like, if you remember at the very end of the last chapter, Jesus said, "Look, your house is abandoned and desolate. For I tell you this, you will never see me again until you say, 'Blessings on the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" So I feel like if you're not receiving the Holy Spirit by having faith in Jesus, if he's not having mercy on you despite your guilt, and if he's not giving you the Holy Spirit, you're in a state of spiritual desolation. And so you yourself become that abomination. So when it says, the language that it uses here is the sacrilegious object that causes desecration. I honestly feel like it's referring to other people or oneself, like in a state of disgrace, in a state of non-grace, in a state of like not being like expelled from the presence of God. And so like when you're not in the presence of God and you're not in a state of grace, you yourself are an abomination, and you are just a like, what is desolation, right? A desolate place, like a lifeless, arid, dry desert place. And we know Jesus refers to the Spirit as being like wind or water, right? It's like, it's life-giving. You're baptized in water. So a desolate desert place, like that's where unclean spirits and demons are said to live. Like they flee into the desert. And so like, again, Jesus said in verse 15, "The day is coming when you will see what Daniel the prophet spoke about, the sacrilegious object that causes desecration, standing in the holy place." So I personally feel like this refers to a sense of spiritual transformation, like where you receive the so-called like eyes to see, like almost like a second set of spiritual eyes so that you can see spiritual things, or almost like from other faith traditions, what they call opening your third eye so that you can see like spiritual things. And so I feel like what he says here, you will see what Daniel the prophet spoke about, this sacrilegious object that causes desecration, this abomination of desolation. I feel like what he's saying is that you will so-called like unlock the ability to like see which people are either like have the Spirit or are desolate and don't have the Spirit. And you can actually make that distinction. And I feel like before that happens, you can't. But there is something that happens where suddenly you can. And you can tell by observing people, not judging, but just discerning, this person is like accompanied by unclean spirits. Everywhere this person goes, things get dirtier. the things that they're saying and the things that they believe are indicative of like their ears are deafened to the voice of the Holy Spirit, and they don't even know what they don't know. And previously you're blind to that, but the day comes when you gain vision of that. And so that's like another step in the progress of like, Jesus coming back, the Son of Man coming back from the clouds. So let's go on. I mean, those were my thoughts, right? Let's move on. The day is coming when you will see what Daniel the prophet spoke about, the sacrilegious object that caused this desecration standing in the holy place. I could say more, but I think we should move on. Reader, pay attention. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills. A person out on the deck of a roof must not go down into the house to pack. A person out in the field must not return even to get a coat. How terrible it will be for pregnant women and for nursing mothers in those days. And pray that your flight will not be in winter or on the Sabbath, for there will be greater anguish than at any time since the world began, and it will never be so great again. In fact, unless that time of calamity is shortened, not a single person will survive, but it will be shortened for the sake of God's chosen ones. Okay, so I mean, do I even need to say something there? A person out on the deck. I mean, to me, it's giving vibes of like, when this transformation occurs and when your eyes are opened and when you can see like, when you can see the abomination of desolation, I mean, it's giving me a vibe of like, flee. Obviously flee, but like what just flee. Just surrender to your faith in God completely. Don't try to go back and cling to your old life from before. Like before your eyes were opened, before your third eye was opened, before you gained this like spiritual ability to discern like spiritual things. You cannot go back to how you were previously living. Even, I feel like it's saying don't even try, but I feel like even if you did, you would fail anyways. Like after your eye is opened, you can't just like go back to like playing video games and watching TV or whatever. Like it just like doesn't hit. Like it doesn't, who cares? You don't care anymore. And also I feel like because your eyes have been opened in that way, like what you used to really enjoy, personally from my experience, I have more of an experience of like, I guess I want to say like disgust or even just like sadness and pity. Like this is gross. I don't want to watch. Like, I feel like there's nowhere for me to go. Like I need to get out of Judah and I need to go up into the hills because there is nowhere to go. I feel like everything on the internet is like evil. Everything on like, almost everything on like streaming is like evil. You start to see it everywhere, I feel like. And, pray that your flight will not be in winter or on the Sabbath. I mean, I feel like I have deep personal lore that comes to mind here. And it was in the winter. And I remember walking around in some hills, barefoot, in the snow. I don't know if I was confused or what. I really don't know what happened. But I do remember someone like came and rescued me. And he came from a church. And he gave me a coat. And I went to a hospital. I have no idea where I was. Somewhere outside Pittsburgh. Yeah, I really don't know. I don't know how I got there, because it was like, I don't know, the time, my memory of like the sequence of events was kind of confused, like the timeline. Let's move on. Verse 23. Then, if anyone tells you, look, here is the Messiah, or there he is, don't believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will rise up and perform great signs and wonders, so as to deceive, if possible, even God's chosen ones. See, I have warned you about this ahead of time. So if anyone tells you, look, the Messiah is out in the desert, don't bother to go and look. Or look, he is hiding here. Don't believe it. For as the lightning flashes in the east and shines to the west, so it will be when the Son of Man comes. I mean, I would just say think about that for a second, right? It's basically, I feel like the text, what it's saying to me is that, like, when Jesus comes back, everybody, everywhere will know simultaneously. There's not going to be, like, some people who learned about Jesus's return first, and then they're going to, like, tell you, and you have to, like, believe them. It's going to be like a flash of lightning. Like, lightning flashes instantly. And if you can see it, like, you can see it, like, from miles away. Nobody sees lightning, and then they go and, like, tell someone else, and they're like, hey, come look at this lightning. Because even if they would do that, it's already gone.